everybody. Welcome to my floss tube. My name's Amy. I'm Fiber Arts Amy here and on Instagram. I'm doing something a little bit different today. This isn't a normal floss tube. I've had several requests to show how I wash things, how I pre-wash things. And so I thought I would try to kind of explain that today. This is a little awkward, my setup. I'm in my powder room. Normally I do this downstairs in our laundry room. We have a utility sink that I use, and I have all kind of my dye supplies and everything down there. But their lighting there is awful, like really awful. It wouldn't really be possible to film down there. So I'm trying to do this in my powder room. I don't know if I'm going to kind of remember to cover everything. If you have any questions, please just ask in the comments, or send me a message over on Instagram or something. This is just how I do it. I've talked before about how I like to wash my finished products, especially my finished memorabilias. They're huge pieces. Mine tend to stick around for sometimes a decade or more. And so they can pick up some dirt and some grime and some oils from my hands and whatnot. I just feel better if I can wash them when I'm done with it. So I pre-wash the fabric and the fibers. So what I'm going to show you today is how I pre-wash the fibers. Now, first, these are two water lilies that I actually pre-washed months ago. They've been sitting in my basement for ages. So I'll show you kind of what I'm going to do with those today, but I also have a new water lily that just showed up. This one's hot peppers, and I'll show you how I get started, okay? And then I'll show you, these have already been washed, so I'll show you what I do with them once they've been washed. But I'll show you this first, how I get started. So this is water lilies, it's hot peppers. I ordered this for a Mirabilia, I think probably the most recent. Is it Rosamond that came out? I'm guessing that's what it goes in. I'd have to look it up to be sure. Now, a color like this that has all of these bright pinks, I can almost guarantee that it's going to bleed. You would not want to use a color like this. And what I'm doing right now is just gently untying the knot that holds it to the card. But you would not want to use a color like this in anything, including a Mirabilia, and then wash it. So I'm having a hard time kind of staying in view, doing my best here. But you would not want to, use one of these and then wash your Mirabilia, because you're likely to get this running all over the fabric and or any like surrounding stitches, if not staining the whole piece pink. I don't know that there's enough dye in here to do that, but there is a lot of dye. So I just untied the knot enough to remove it from the card, and I hang on to the card. Now, what I use to wash these typically are, I have a couple of them in here. We have a lot of these plastic containers around. These are just what's left over from like deli meats, like lunch meats that my kids eat when we pack their lunches. More specifically, my husband usually packs their lunches, but we save these, and I use them for dyeing and in pre-washing and whatnot. So after I've untied this floss, it just opens up into this big loop. I keep it in this big loop, okay? I don't want to tangle it up. So most of the time, to be honest with you, I will just wash it like this in the container. But if you want to, because when I'm washing it, I don't really agitate it. It's really more a series of soaks. But if you want to make sure you're not going to end up with a tangled mess of floss, and if you think you might have to rinse it multiple times, it's not a bad idea to do what I'm about to show you, because the more you have to mess with it, the more it's in and out of water baths and whatnot, the more likely it is to tangle. So hopefully you can see this. This is the same thing. If any of you are knitters, you buy a skein of yarn and it shows up with ties, you know, in multiple places around the skein. That's all I'm doing here. I'm just going to tie up the skein of floss. Now again, it came with a knot in place. These are the tails that tied the skein to the card. I'm leaving that knot in place. And then I'm going to go basically across from that knot. And this is just sewing thread, but you can also use a very light colored DMC. So don't use like something you think's gonna run. Don't use another hand-dyed floss. But you could just cut, you know, snip like a few inches of white DMC and even use just one of the 6 strands if you wanted to. So this is small enough. You could, well, I'll show you 2 different ways to do it. You can probably get away with just putting the thread around the skein. I don't know if you can see that there. And just tying a loose knot. You don't want to tie it super tight. You don't want these fibers crushed there, squeezed too tight, because you want water to be able to get all the way in there. Let's see if I can show that. Oh, there we go. So I just tied a loose knot there, and then I'm going to show you the sort of more proper way to do it, which probably should have cleaned my sink before I did this, but so I have the knot at the top that was already on the skein, and I've just tied a knot at the bottom. So I'm going to go halfway up on one side. I don't know if you can see that, but hanging. I'm going to go halfway up on one side, and I'm going to split this in half-ish. It doesn't really matter. They don't need to be continuous. Like, you don't have to make sure, you don't need to worry about which, so I have six strands here. You don't need to like worry about which 3 strands are with each other, if that makes sense. And you don't need to worry about, like, it can be 2 and 4 or whatever, it doesn't matter. But I'm going to take my thread and basically make a figure 8. So it's going to go under 1/2, trying to stay on camera, around, up, and to the other side. You guys kind of see the figure 8 there? I'll do it again in a minute on the other side so you can see. And I'm just going to tie a simple knot. Any kind of knot you want that's not too tight, because you want the water to get down into the fibers. You don't want the knot to like restrict the floss too much. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to divide the strands approximately in half. And I am trying to explain this like as if I'm talking to somebody who has absolutely no clue how to do this. So you might not need all this information, but you might not need any of it. But some of you at least, I know, want it. So I'm doing my best here. So there's my figure 8. So it's basically like the floss is divided into 2 clumps. But then I'm going to just again tie, I don't even know what this like knot is called. But I'm just making a loop and pulling these through. And they're very loose. But this basically just makes it so it helps keep your loop of, or your loop of floss open and from getting tangled. So I effectively have 4 ties. I have the one that the company made where it was attached to the card. I have one opposite it, and then I have 2 halfway between those others. So there's basically 4 ties. I've split this into quarters. Now, if I'm not sure if a floss is going to run, maybe it's like a medium shade, or maybe it's a blue, but blues are kind of known for running sometimes, but maybe it's a little bit on the lighter end of things. I will start by just soaking the floss in some warm water. This is, like I said, I can almost guarantee you it's going to run. I will be flabbergasted if it doesn't. So I'm not even going to bother with an initial soak to see if it'll run. I'm just going to assume it's going to run. And what I'm going to use to wash it is this stuff. I have a very used, well-loved bottle here. What Synthropol does is it keeps dye molecules in solution. It's used a lot like with tie-dye to, like, you can wash a tie-dyed shirt with this and the colors won't run into each other. So the idea is that the dye molecules go up into the water, they get enclosed in the Synthropol molecules, and they're kept from redepositing on your fabric or your floss or whatever it is. So this will help prevent, it'll help pull out any loose dye, and it'll help, for example, keep like, oh, where's my camera? Keep like the pink from redepositing onto like the lighter pink or orange parts of the floss. So you need very little. There are directions for like if you want to measure it out, but I'm not much of I'm lazy. I don't measure. I'm only doing a little thing of floss here. Try to get on camera. So I'm basically just going to pour in like the tiniest little dollop I can get. That's probably like 5 times more than I need. And actually what I'm going to do, I'll explain why in a minute, but I'm actually going to be re-washing this purple floss too, the darker one, and I really have more Synthropol than I need here, so I'm going to go ahead and just pour some of it into the other container. I'm going to wash them in separate containers just out of an abundance of caution. Also, these are probably pretty small containers, and if you're trying to wash floss in a container that's too small, you just don't have enough water to like rinse out the excess dye that you need to. This red floss, it's its first wash, so I'm going to pour some more water into this container here. And then in the floss goes. If I hadn't tied it, I would take a little more care with it. You can kind of lay it on the water in its like looped form. Then, oh, there's something in there. That's okay. Then this just sits. Now it needs to sit for at least 30 minutes. I sometimes leave them for a week. Just because I don't like, you know, I'll have good intentions of getting down to wash a bunch of stuff, and sometimes it just doesn't happen. So sometimes things sit there for a while. Can't get the little speck out. So this just sits. I have an area on the floor of my laundry room where I just line these up if I need to. What will happen is I will come back maybe later today, maybe in a couple days. I'm not planning on filming this part. And this water will be red, okay, or pink. And I'll have to decide what to do from there. And I'm going to use these purple flosses to show you what I'm going to do from there. Also, again, I'm hanging on to the tag. I'm going to put it with a container. You can keep the lids, and oops, sorry, shaking the camera. You can use the lids if you want to. So with these flosses over here, this is what I had done. These got washed just like you saw over here. Some dye came out. You could see it in the water. And then I rinsed them very well. And I'll show you how I rinse them here in a minute. I actually washed these two flosses in the same container initially. I don't always use these plastic containers. If you're using something this small, I would only do one floss at a time. But I also have some larger like Pyrex and glass bowls and things that I've picked up from Goodwill. Glass is the best thing to do it with because the dye won't stick to the glass. Over time, dye can stick to these plastic containers, and then you wouldn't want to risk that dye messing up your floss either. But yeah, like you can get like old glass and Pyrex containers at like Goodwill and thrift shops, sometimes just for like $1 or so a piece, and those are great. So I actually used a larger bowl and I washed these two purples together. This is Water Lily's Aubergine, I think is the darker one, and Hyacinth is the lighter one. So these two colors are very similar. They're both shades of purple, predominantly purple with nothing too light happening. And you can see I didn't tie these up, okay? So I wash these really well. I soak them in the Synthropol. After soaking them in the Synthropol, when I take them out of that, I usually then also soak them in just some clean water to help draw the Synthropol out of the floss, and then I rinse them really well. And then what I do is I set them on a white paper towel. It's actually a paper towel doubled up. So I'll set them on a white paper towel and just leave them to dry. And you can see where each one was left. So where the hyacinth was left, the paper towel is white. I don't see any sign of bleeding there. So as far as I'm concerned, my hyacinth is all set. I don't need to worry about that. And, oh, where's my camera? Okay. In case you don't know how to do this, I take my floss, get it back in its circle. I put some fingers on each side, and then I just start twisting. So I'm twisting my right hand forward and twisting my left hand backwards. And I just do that at the same time. Sorry, it makes everything wiggle. But if you do that, there's also a way to make cording if you don't have a cording maker. But once you've done that and it's twisted, the skein will twist back on itself and you can loop it through. So I got a nice neat skein again. And what I do is I take the tag. I don't usually put the floss back through there, but once I've got this twisted up, I will take the tag and just slip it through the loop. And I'm not going to be like throwing this around. So that's secure enough for my purposes so that I'll know that that is Water Lily's hyacinth. But my aubergine, you can see left all this residue on the paper towel. The aubergine needs to be washed again. There's still a lot of dye. So basically I'm acting as though, or I'm believing or treating it as though my paper towel is my fabric, or like the surrounding, any surrounding light colored stitches. If the floss wet left that residue on the white paper towel, I've got to assume it's going to leave a mess on any fabric that I use. So I need to rewash this. So that's why I put Synthropol in here as well. I'm going to put some water in there. And just so you can see how I rinse it, once I've taken floss out of the water, let's pretend for a minute this is still wet, I always, especially if I haven't tied it up in other places, like I haven't done for this one, I make sure I maintain my loop. Now it is tied there. That's the tie the manufacturer did. That's still in place. And you can untangle these if they get tangled, but I try to maintain that loop anytime I'm handling it. But I usually just put it over a finger and then maybe kind of ball it up in my hand. And let me move you a little bit. This is all I do to rinse it. I'm gentle. I'm really just letting water soak in and then I'm squeezing it. So after I take the floss out of the Synthropol solution, this is what I would be doing to rinse it, okay? So once it's come out of the Synthropol, I would rinse it like this, and then I would put it back in a container with clear water. Now, since I've decided this one needs to go in the Synthropol again, that's what I'm going to do. And drop that one in the Synthropol. And that's basically it. I repeat this process. So I'm going to let that sit in the Synthropol. I've also got my container with the red floss in the Synthropol. I'm probably going to leave them overnight, to be honest with you. It's not going to hurt them. I'll just leave these overnight, come back to them tomorrow. I try to keep the tags with them so I know what's what. But I'll just leave these overnight, come back to them tomorrow, rinse them real well, put them back, just use the same containers, put them back in some clean water, let them sit for a few hours. And I continue doing that process of rinsing and letting them soak in clear water until the water runs clear. once the water looks like it's running clear, that's when I lay it on a fresh paper towel. Oh, you can see here that like some of the dye even soaked through to the back for the aubergine. This is doubled up. I just repeat that until this is basically not having any deposited color or having very little color deposited. I always keep in mind what it is I'm actually stitching, and what it's going to be around and how much of a problem I think it's going to be. So this is what I do until I don't see any residue on here, or until I see nearly no residue on here. That's also an option. If you look at the side where I had the hyacinth drying, I don't know if you guys can see it, but there is actually this tiny bit, super tiny little bit of pink that got deposited on the paper towel, but that's almost too little to notice. I'm not going to worry about it. That's not going to affect anything. If I'm straining to see it on here and it's already been rinsed and that's already come out, it's not going to, I don't think it's going to affect my finished piece. So this is what I do. So far, I have been able to get my water lilies all to a place where I felt comfortable using them in my Mirabilias. Meaning I was confident enough to stitch my Mirabilia with them and know that I'd be able to wash my Mirabilia at the end without the water lilies running. Famous last words, right? Keep your fingers crossed for me. But so far this has worked. But there are other projects, like I've mentioned my chatelaine, I ended up giving up on washing things. There's so many different silks and different manufacturers in the chatelaine I'm doing. I was washing and washing and washing and washing, and things were not even like the dye residue wasn't even getting better. Like you weren't even seeing less and less on the paper towel each time. It was just, it was so much. I didn't seem like it was getting any better. And so I did eventually give up. I would say if you're trying to do this, please don't feel like you can't give up too. If it ends up being too much work and you're like, this just isn't worth it and I don't want to wash my finished piece, then don't do it. You don't need to pre-wash everything. It's just obviously tragic. A lot of us has been through it where you don't pre-wash fibers. You don't even maybe even think about it. And then you stitch something you love and you wash it and the floss runs and potentially ruins your piece. And sometimes there is or isn't something you can do about that to like fix the problem or disguise the problem or make it look better. So this is what I do. Now I use the Synthropol. I wanted to say also, I think the Synthropol helps. You can also just use Dawn dishwashing detergent. It's not gonna, I think, work quite as well, but I think it'll work pretty well. And I have not had, so some people are like, no, you're not allowed to wash silk. You are absolutely allowed to wash silk, okay? The dyer had to wash the silk to dye it, okay? So don't worry about that. I've had lots of people be like, oh my God, you can't get silk wet. You can totally get silk wet. It's not a problem. So don't worry about that. And I hope this helped. I hope this helps some of you. If you want to pre-wash your fibers, I hope this helps. If you don't want to pre-wash your fibers, that's cool too. Maybe you still found this entertaining or edifying in some way and can use some of what I said for something else that you do. Or I just helped entertain you for a little bit of stitching time. Anyway, thanks for joining me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed it or got something out of it. And hopefully I'll be back with a floss tube here soon. Thanks, guys. Bye.